Welcome to Nikki's Nightmares, where chilling tales come to life. In today's terrifying story, we descend into the shadowed world of cryptids, creatures that exist on the edge of belief. Beings whispered about in folklore, caught in fleeting glimpses, and heard moving through forests long after the world has gone silent. From towering figures that stalk the treeline to entities born from human fear and hunger, these encounters blur the line between myth and reality and raise a haunting question. What if some legends are real? If you love scary stories, paranormal encounters, and true horror experiences, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we delve into the deep, dark, and the mysterious. Cryptids are creatures that exist on the edge of belief. They are seen, they are heard, they are feared, and yet they cannot be proven. By definition, cryptids are monsters, larger-than-life beings said to roam land, sea, or sky, leaving behind footprints, screams, and shattered nerves instead of scientific evidence. Their existence is championed by cryptozoology, a fringe field that relies not on laboratories or microscopes, but on eyewitness accounts, folklore, and generational memory. To mainstream science, these stories are insufficient, anecdotal, unreliable, but to those who have heard something moving through the trees, to those who have seen eyes staring back from the dark, cryptids are very real. To some, they are nothing more than campfire tales, stories whispered at sleepovers to scare the brave into silence. To others, they are warnings. Among the most famous cryptids is Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, a towering hairy figure that appears across cultures and centuries. In Central California, ancient Native American rock art created by the Yokuts people depicts a being they called Hairy Man, part of what they referred to as the family. These drawings are believed to be hundreds, possibly over 1,000 years old. Long before modern sightings, the creature was already known. Across different regions, the names change: Wild Man, Hairy Man, Forest Giant, but the meaning remains the same. In many traditions, children were warned never to speak the creature's name aloud. To do so was said to invite it into the night, where it would come silently, lift them from their beds, and carry them into the darkness, never to return. And yet, as terrifying as those legends are, there is another cryptid whose story is far darker, one that does not merely stalk the woods, one that begins as human. This is the Wendigo. The Wendigo, sometimes spelled Windigo, is a creature born from native North American folklore, most prominently among indigenous peoples of the Great Lakes region. It is described as tall, emaciated, and skeletal, a frozen giant with sunken eyes, long claws, and a hunger that can never be satisfied, a hunger for human flesh. The Wendigo is not merely a monster, it is a warning. Its legend was passed down as a cautionary tale, meant to teach the dangers of greed, excess, and moral collapse, particularly during brutal winters when starvation was a real and constant threat. In these stories, the Wendigo represents what happens when survival turns into selfishness, when desperation crosses a line that can never be uncrossed. In some traditions, the Wendigo is an evil spirit, one that possesses humans, slowly twisting their thoughts until hunger becomes obsession. In others, it is a transformation. A person becomes a Wendigo when they surrender to greed, or when they commit the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. Once human flesh is tasted, the change begins. Many stories describe the Wendigo as stalking its victims through dense forests, taunting them, mimicking voices, drawing them deeper into isolation before striking. Other legends say the Wendigo doesn't hunt at all. It waits inside a person's mind until that person becomes the monster. Some versions claim the Wendigo's heart turns to ice. Others say it is ice, and trapped within that frozen core is the human that once was. In rare folklore, killing the Wendigo could free the trapped soul, but in most stories, there is no redemption. Once the transformation is complete, death is the only escape. For generations, these stories remained legends, until the winter of 1878. In what is now Alberta, Canada, a Cree trapper named Swift Runner took his family, his wife, 6 children, his mother, and his brother, into the remote wilderness for the winter hunting season. This was normal. Families had survived this way for centuries. But when spring came, only Swift Runner returned. He told authorities his family had starved during the harsh winter. He claimed he alone had survived. But there was a problem. Swift Runner did not look like a starving man. He appeared healthy, strong, well-fed. Suspicion grew. When investigators traveled to his winter camp, they found a scene of absolute horror. Human bones scattered across the ground, evidence that bodies had been butchered, cooked, a pot filled with human fat. Bones smashed open, cracked deliberately to extract marrow. Swift Runner confessed. He admitted to murdering and consuming his entire family, including his youngest son, whom he killed after winter had ended, after food was available again. There was no famine, no excuse of starvation. Swift Runner claimed he had been possessed by the Wendigo. He said the spirit took hold of him, that it demanded flesh, that once he tasted it, he could not stop. He was tried, convicted, and executed in 1879, the first legal execution in Alberta. Witnesses reported that he showed remorse, even joking with a priest before his death, but the damage was done. His case became the most infamous example of what would later be called Wendigo psychosis, a controversial condition described in early psychiatric literature. Those said to suffer from it experienced paranoia, insomnia, withdrawal, violent dreams, and a terrifying belief that they must consume human flesh, even when other food was available. Modern psychiatry no longer recognizes Wendigo psychosis as a formal diagnosis, but the debate remains. Was Swift Runner mentally ill, interpreting his actions through cultural belief? Was he truly convinced he was possessed? Or did the legend of the Wendigo provide a framework, an explanation for something far darker already inside him? In Wendigo lore, once a person crosses the line, once they taste human flesh, their heart freezes. The transformation is irreversible. Only death can end it. Swift Runner's story mirrors the legend perfectly. Whether the Wendigo is a spirit, a psychological manifestation, or a myth born from the fear of becoming something monstrous, its message is clear. The Wendigo is not just a creature in the woods. It is the fear of what humans become when survival turns to greed, when hunger consumes morality, and when the line between man and monster disappears. Some cryptids lurk in forests. The Wendigo waits inside us, and in the depths of winter, when the world grows quiet, it is always watching. The Wendigo encounter. I don't usually tell this story, not because I don't remember it, but because remembering it makes the woods feel closer, like they're listening. A few weeks ago, I received a message from someone who wanted answers. He didn't know what he had seen, only that it wasn't an animal he recognized, and it wasn't human. He asked if I believed in something called a Wendigo. What he described sounded uncomfortably familiar. So tonight, I'm telling my version. My wife and I had recently moved to a quiet rural area near a stretch of protected woodland. We were still learning the trails, still getting used to the way the forest seemed to swallow sound. One afternoon, we decided to go bough hunting along an old bridle path that cut through a swampy section of the woods, the kind of place where the ground feels soft under your boots and the trees grow too close together. Not long after we started walking, I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to spook her or myself, but every step forward made that feeling heavier, like eyes pressing into my back. We reached a fork in the trail. One path curved right, narrow and dark. The other was wider, marked by old snowmobile tracks. I'd been to that fork before. Every time, something in me told me not to go farther, a warning I couldn't explain. But this time, something moved in the woods just off the trail. Whatever it was, it ran fast, and when it did, I felt the vibration through the ground. It was big. Thinking it might be a deer, we followed the sound. About 50 yards in, the trees opened up into a stand of tall pines. That's when I saw it, partially hidden behind a tree. At first, I thought it was a bear, standing upright, rubbing its back against the trunk, but then it shifted, stepped sideways, and I saw an arm, too long, too thin, black, not brown, not fur-covered, just black, like it absorbed the light around it. Then it dropped down, almost folding itself, and I caught a glimpse of its head. It wasn't shaped right, long, horizontal, with ears, or something like ears, pointing back and up. Pale strands of hair hung from it, grey and lifeless. When it straightened again, I realized how tall it was. 8 feet, maybe more. Its arms dangled too low, bending in ways they shouldn't. We just stood there, watching. Then it took 3 massive steps and vanished into the underbrush without a sound. We approached the tree slowly. The ground beneath it was pressed down deep, like something heavy had been standing there for a while. I called out, thinking, hoping it might be another hunter in camouflage. No answer, only silence. As dusk crept in, we turned back, but the feeling didn't leave. All the way down the trail, it felt like something was pacing us just out of sight, matching our speed, staying parallel. Near the edge of the forest, we stepped into an open field, and there stood a deer, broadside, perfect shot. I raised my bow and released the arrow. I watched the glowing nock fly, then dip low. I heard it hit something, but when we searched, the arrow was gone, until I spotted the light behind us, near the trail. The arrow was stuck nearly straight down into the ground, leaning the opposite direction of the shot. That shouldn't have been possible. Then the smell hit us. Rot, mud, sulfur. A metallic stench so strong it burned the back of my throat. It felt like it was breathing into my face. We ran to the truck and left without saying a word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I've hunted my entire life. I know the woods. I know animals. But I've never felt fear like that. Not the kind that follows you home. Not the kind that makes you question whether you were ever meant to go back out there. Some legends describe the Wendigo as gaunt, towering, foul-smelling. A creature that mimics animals or people, but never quite gets it right. Something that stalks the forest, waiting. I don't know what I saw, but I know this. The woods were watching us long before we noticed them, and whatever it was, it knew we were there. The Wendigo stalking. It happened in the dead of winter a few years ago, during a stretch of cold so brutal it felt like the land itself had turned hostile. I was staying with a relative, an older family member who lived alone in a remote stretch of forest far north, close enough to the border that the radio stations would fade in and out between countries. His cabin sat miles from the nearest road, surrounded by nothing but black trees and endless snow. No neighbors, no cell service, just isolation. I'd always liked visiting. The silence felt calm. That night changed everything. The temperature had dropped to something obscene, well below anything I'd experienced before. The kind of cold that burns your lungs and makes metal scream when it contracts. My relative had driven into town before dark to restock supplies, leaving me alone in the cabin for a few hours. Inside, everything was normal. The fire was going. The old logs popped and hissed. I was wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through my phone, half listening to the wind push against the walls. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, dragging, slow, heavy, purposeful. At first, I told myself it was a branch, or ice shifting, or an animal struggling through the snow, but the sound kept circling the cabin, scraping softly against the frozen ground, stopping just long enough for me to hope it was over, then starting again. And then came the knocking, not at the door, at the window, 3 taps, evenly spaced and deliberate. No one should have been out there. The nearest person lived miles away, and no animal knocks like that. My stomach tightened as the sound came again. 3 more taps, slightly harder this time. I stood up without realizing it, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whatever was outside could hear it. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and moved toward the window. That was my first mistake. The beam cut through the darkness and landed just beyond the tree line. Something was standing there. It was impossibly tall, 7, maybe 8 feet, but painfully thin, like it had been starved for years. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending at wrong angles. The skin looked dead, darkened, cracked, frostbitten, stretched tight over bone. And its eyes, they weren't reflecting the light. They were glowing, dull and orange, like embers buried deep in ash. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I knew, instinctively, that it was watching me long before I ever saw it. Then it smiled, its mouth stretched far wider than it should have, revealing too many teeth, thin, jagged, uneven, and when it spoke, the sound didn't match the shape standing in front of me. Let me in. The voice was wrong, slowed, distorted, like something imitating human speech without understanding it. I broke then. I ran for the back room, grabbed the rifle kept above the door, locked every bolt, and pressed myself into the farthest corner of the cabin. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the gun. The knocking stopped, but the scratching didn't. Slow, patient scraping along the walls, around the cabin, over and over again, like it was testing the structure, like it knew it didn't need to rush. Time lost all meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt endless. Then, headlights. The sound stopped instantly. When my relative's truck pulled up and light flooded the trees, the forest went silent. Too silent. He found me pale, soaked in sweat, still clutching the rifle. I told him everything. He didn't interrupt, didn't question me, just nodded and went outside to check the area. When he came back in, his face had changed. "There are no tracks," he said quietly. "Nothing in the snow, not a single mark." That made no sense. I'd heard it moving. I'd seen it standing there. But outside, the ground was untouched. Perfect, like nothing had ever been there at all. I left at first light the next morning. Before I did, he stopped me at the door. "If you ever hear it again," he said, not meeting my eyes, "don't look, and whatever you do, never let it inside." I haven't been back since. I haven't told anyone, until now. But I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there, waiting for someone to answer the knock. The tale of Dogman. The legend of the Dogman doesn't begin with a single scream in the night. It begins quietly, passed down in fragments, whispers shared around campfires, warnings spoken just above a breath. For generations, the forests of Michigan have been home to stories of things that do not belong to any known species. Long before modern roads cut through the wilderness, Native American legends spoke of shape-shifting spirits and guardian animals, beings that could move between forms, protecting the land or punishing those who trespassed too far. These weren't bedtime stories, they were cautions. When European settlers arrived, they brought their own fears with them, tales of werewolves, cursed men, and beasts that walked like humans but hunted like animals. In the dense forests and isolated settlements of Michigan, those stories didn't fade, they merged. Over time, the lines between old-world monsters and ancient spirits blurred, and something new took shape in the folklore, something they would come to call the Dogman. The earliest documented encounters trace back to the late 1800s. Lumberjacks working deep in northern Michigan's forests began reporting something stalking them from the tree line. They described a massive wolf-like creature that stood upright on two legs, its eyes glowing in the darkness. They spoke of a howl so deep and unnatural it rattled through their chests rather than their ears. At first, no one listened. They were tired men, isolated men surrounded by shadows and howling wind, easy to dismiss, but the stories didn't stop. They resurfaced again and again, over decades, different towns, different witnesses, the same fear. Then, in 1987, the legend broke out of the woods and into the public ear. A radio DJ aired a song recounting alleged Dogman sightings, meant as entertainment, perhaps even a joke. But something unexpected happened. Listeners began calling in, not to laugh, but to share their own encounters, stories they had never spoken out loud before, stories they had buried. From that moment on, the Dogman was no longer just folklore, it was a shared experience. One of the most chilling reports dates back to the early 1960s in a small Michigan town surrounded by forests and farmland. A local deputy was out on patrol when he encountered something standing in the road ahead of him. At first glance, it looked like a man. Then it moved. What he described defied explanation. A towering figure, well over 6 feet tall, with the body of a man and the head of a dog or wolf. Broad shoulders, muscular limbs, covered in dark fur. It stood upright, and it was watching him. Despite being armed, the deputy did not fire. He later admitted that something about the creature froze him in place. An instinct, older than logic, told him that whatever this was, it wasn't meant to be challenged. When it took a step toward him, he ran. He didn't stop until he was far from the trees. That wasn't the last report. Over the years, sightings have surfaced across Michigan and beyond. Remote forests, abandoned buildings, even quiet suburban edges where the trees press too close to backyards. Witnesses often describe the same pattern: a sudden silence, a feeling of being watched, a wave of dread so intense it feels physical, like the air itself has turned hostile. And then, the eyes, glowing, intelligent, fixed on them. Those who claim to have seen the Dogman describe a creature that looks like a fusion of human and canine. It walks upright, balanced and deliberate. Its frame is thick with muscle, its fur dark, black or deep brown, absorbing what little light exists. The head is unmistakably wolf-like, with a long snout filled with sharp teeth and ears that stand rigid, alert. But it's the sound that many say haunts them the most. The howl, not a wolf, not a dog, something deeper, something wrong, a sound that vibrates through bone and instinct, triggering a primal terror that has no modern name. Those who hear it say it feels like a warning or a claim. Despite skepticism, belief in the Dogman persists. Some point to photographs, others to tracks. Many rely only on memory and the fear that never left them. While details vary, certain elements remain disturbingly consistent. The height, the posture, the eyes, and above all, the overwhelming sense that this is not simply an animal. Witnesses often say the same thing. It felt ancient, it felt intelligent, and it felt like it knew exactly what they were. Whether the Dogman is a relic of ancient folklore, a misidentified predator, or something far older and more dangerous, one truth remains unchanged. The forests remember, and sometimes they watch back. The Dogman encounter. I don't usually leave home unprepared. Normally, there's weight on my hip wherever I go, a familiar presence that keeps my mind at ease. But that morning was different. I was heading into town for routine medical work, the kind of place where you're expected to leave protection behind. So I made a choice I rarely make. I locked it in the truck instead of wearing it. That decision nearly cost me everything. Because of road construction, I took a narrow back road, one I'd driven dozens of times before. Open fields stretched out on either side, broken only by brush and fencing. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked canine, just a shape in the field, maybe half a mile out. But even from that distance, something felt off. I slowed down. The closer I got, the more wrong it seemed. It was massive. I've spent enough time in rural areas to know the local wildlife. Wolves pass through those fields. I've seen them before, but this was different. This thing was larger than any wolf I'd ever encountered, thicker through the shoulders, taller at the chest, its presence commanding the land around it. And for reasons I still don't understand. I stopped. I shut off the engine. That alone should have been a warning. I don't stop for wolves. I don't leave my vehicle. Yet there I was, phone in hand, walking into the field like I was being pulled by something I couldn't see. The creature moved behind a dense cluster of bushes. I couldn't see through them, so I circled wide, trying to get a clear angle. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. One idea echoed in my head, over and over. Get the picture. When I rounded the bushes, it was right there, 5, maybe 6 feet away. Time slowed. I froze. The world narrowed to the sound of my breathing and the weight of its stare. I raised my phone, and that's when it growled. Not an animal growl, a warning. I didn't just hear it, I understood it. Every instinct screamed at me to back away. The hair on my neck stood straight up. Whatever trance I'd been under shattered, and fear slammed into me all at once. I shoved the phone into my pocket and spoke loudly, forcing confidence into my voice. If you want trouble, I've got something for you. I reached for my side. Nothing. My hand swept my belt again, empty. And then reality hit me like a punch to the chest. The weapon was in the truck, across the road. I turned slowly, forcing myself not to run. My instincts were on fire, telling me to sprint, but my mind knew better. That thing was bigger than me, stronger. If I ran, it would chase, and it would win. I walked. When I reached the truck, I glanced over my shoulder. It was standing at the edge of the road, front limbs planted on the gravel. It hadn't let me move any farther than that. Not an inch. I climbed inside and slammed the door. My hands shook as I reached for the console, drawing the firearm, only to realize I hadn't chambered a round. The sound of metal sliding echoed far too loudly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw its face at the driver's side window. Its nose nearly touched the glass, and its eyes. They weren't animal. They were aware, intelligent and amused. It looked at me the way a human might look at something foolish, something fragile, like it couldn't believe I'd willingly walked into its space. I started the engine, slowly eased forward. I knew then it wasn't going to hurt me. It had already proven it didn't need to. As I drove away, movement in the rearview mirror caught my eye. The creature turned and walked back into the field on 2 legs. The Yowie. I learned about the Yowie the way most people do, through whispers. Not campfire stories meant to entertain, but warnings meant to survive. Long before Europeans ever set foot on this land, Australia's Aboriginal peoples already knew its name. Among them, the Kuku-Yalanji spoke openly of a creature that lived alongside them in the deep wilderness. They claimed the Yowie wasn't a myth or a spirit, but a living thing, something that shared the forests and sometimes turned violent. According to their accounts, there isn't just one kind of Yowie. There are 2. One is massive, towering up to 10 feet tall. The other is smaller, 4 to 5 feet in height. Both are described the same way: ape-like faces, powerful builds, and thick orangey-brown hair that clings to the body in rough, matted layers, usually shy, usually hidden, but when provoked, dangerous. The warnings didn't end with the Aboriginal tribes. When the British arrived with the first fleet at Sydney Cove in 1788, settlers were repeatedly cautioned about something watching from the mountains and forests. An ape-like creature that didn't belong to any known animal. At first they didn't listen, but in 1820 a letter reached London describing an encounter that took place decades earlier, in 1789. Convicts and Marines had gone hunting, killing several wallabies before beginning the return to camp. That's when they noticed something on a nearby hill. It was standing among the trees, watching them. They later claimed it was twice the height of an ordinary man. It didn't charge, it didn't scream. It simply observed until it vanished back into the bush. By 1849, reports had spread further south. On Phillip Island, several witnesses encountered a creature between 6 and 7 feet tall, described as something between a baboon and a man. It was seen sitting at the edge of a lake, calm, unmoving, until shots were fired. What happened afterward was never clearly documented, only that the creature was gone. Then there's the photograph. In 1936, at an isolated logging camp in Batlow, deep in the snowy mountains, a man named Rich Jones took a series of images that still divide researchers today. One photograph appears to show 2 men sitting on a log, and behind them something else, a large figure, hands resting in its lap, head tilted downward toward its chest. Analysts later suggested the shape could be explained by treeline matrixing, but even they admitted something unsettling. The proportions don't quite line up with any known human form. And then there was December of 1979. A local couple, Leo and Patricia George, were walking through the forest when they came upon the carcass of a kangaroo. It had been brutally mutilated. As they stood there, trying to understand what could have done this, they felt it. They weren't alone. Only 40 feet away, something stood watching them. They described a creature nearly 10 feet tall, completely covered in hair. It didn't flee immediately. It stopped, turned, and locked eyes with them. Then it disappeared into the brush. No sound, no tracks. Just the sudden suffocating silence of the Australian bush reclaiming itself. The Yowie doesn't chase fame. It doesn't want to be seen. And maybe that's what makes it so terrifying. because whatever it is, it has been here far longer than we have. The Queensland Yowie sighting. I live alone on a stretch of remote bushland, dozens of acres of dense, unforgiving terrain far from the nearest town. My cabin sits off the grid, no neighbours close enough to hear me scream if something went wrong. I've been here for more than a decade now, long enough to know every sound the land is supposed to make, and every sound it isn't. For years, strange things have been happening around my property. At first I brushed them off. Broken branches, fallen trees, tracks blocked by limbs that hadn't been there the day before. But over time, patterns began to form, patterns I could no longer ignore. Dead trees weren't just falling, they were being moved, propped upright against living ones arranged deliberately, like crude teepee structures. Heavy logs dragged across access paths, branches bent down and woven together to block trails. You could see the marks in the dirt where the bases of the trees had been hauled into place. Whatever was doing it was strong, far stronger than any person I knew. Then, a few nights ago, everything changed. My dog, usually calm, rarely reactive, started barking like I'd never heard before, not playful, not territorial. This was panic, an intruder alert, the kind of bark that tells you something is very, very wrong. I stepped outside. The bush around my cabin is thin enough to see through when the light hits it right. It was still daylight, sunlight filtering through the trees in pale streaks. That's when I saw them, black shapes moving through the bush roughly 60 meters away. At first, I thought they were people. There were too many of them not to be. 8, maybe 10 figures moving fast and in formation. My first thought was confusion. Who would be walking through my land like that, and why? Then my brain caught up with my eyes. They were too tall, far too tall. Each one stood at least 8 feet high, upright, broad, moving with a speed no human could manage through uneven bush. Their strides were long, powerful. They didn't stumble, they didn't slow, they ran. And they were completely silent, no footsteps, no snapping twigs, no breath, just massive dark figures flowing between the trees like shadows pulled loose from the forest itself. The light cut across them, but it didn't seem to touch them. They moved north to south, fast and purposeful, as if they knew exactly where they were going. I stood frozen, watching them disappear into the bush. Earlier that day, I'd heard dogs barking in the distance, neighbours' dogs, agitated, frantic, and before that, loud crashes from the far corner of my land, trees breaking, heavy, solid cracks echoing through the night. Sometimes there's a strange whistling sound too, low, drawn out, unnatural. It doesn't sound like wind, it sounds intentional. Later, I spoke to someone who lives further down the road. He told me a woman nearby has been seeing the same things. She's convinced something is visiting her property regularly. So convinced she's started installing cameras, hoping to catch proof. I don't know what these creatures are. I can't explain the structures. I can't explain the logs being moved or the sounds that come from the bush after dark. And I definitely can't explain the night something slammed into the side of my cabin, hard enough to shake the walls and send me stumbling back in fear. Whatever is out there, it's been watching for a long time, and now that I've seen it, I'm not sure it cares if I know any more. The story ends here, but the terror does not. Join me again, like, comment, and subscribe if you dare.